Or the greatest literary works usually reflect on the context in which they are written on and takes advantage of that in order to provide meaning behind their works. Today's presentation will explore the question, to what extent has an awareness of context enrich or enhance your understanding, where I will focus on two literary masterpieces, the play The Visit by the Swiss playwright Friedrich Dürrenmatt and the tragic novella of Mice and Men, written by the American author John Steinbeck. Both texts use the context in which they are written to provide meaning to their works, where Dürrenmatt intends to criticize Swiss neutrality in World War II, and Steinbeck seeks to exploit the idea of individualism during the Great Depression of 1929. Awareness of the context in which these works were written enhances the understanding of the works, where the reader is clearly able to understand the message and allegorical representations being conveyed by the authors. So first, I'm going to talk about The Visit and show how the context in which the play was written impacted Frederick Dürrenmatt's choices. To give a little context about the play and the playwright, Frederick Dürrenmatt was born in 1921 in the town of Konnefjügen in Switzerland. With two parents that were heavily involved in Swiss politics, it was no surprise that Dürrenmatt would adopt this interest and become a politically active citizen. During the period of the war, he was able to see the fall of capitalism at its finest and the problems that it was bringing to society. He also became highly critical of Switzerland's stance during the war, where the lack of action to combat the Nazis had a huge impact on his plays later on. Now, about the play itself. It is a tragic comedy that belongs to the theater of the absurd. The theater of the absurd is a post-World War II designation of plays that chose to portray an absurdist fiction. Their works often focus on the ideas of existentialism and the loss of meaning in our actions, and therefore all communication ends up breaking down. As it was stated earlier, this play was written in post-World War II Europe, and Duhamel takes advantage of its context to criticize capitalism and Swiss neutrality during the war, and also explore the impacts of money on corrupting justice and society's moral values. And to provide a brief summary of the play, it is set in the fictional town of Gulen, which is going through a major financial crisis. It has as its main protagonists Alfred Ill and Claire Zakanassian. Ill is an old, well-liked man who is set to become mayor of the town. However, upon the arrival of the rich and powerful Madame Zakanassian in the town, she offers £1 million to whoever kills Ill. Later in the play, we learn that Ill had impregnated her in the past, but bribed two men to say that they also had sexual relations with her, thus not making it clear who was the father. The town refuses to take the offer at first, but later on they start to see the benefits, and in the end, Claire is able to get her vendetta as the town kills Ill as a whole. Now, the first concept that will be analyzed is the impact of money in guiding people's actions and how easily it can corrupt our moral values. In the play, at first, the town refuses the offer and states that they aren't savages. But later in the play, it is clear how they became fond of her offer, and the hypocrisy becomes clear. Where in the beginning, the mayor says, "We would rather have poverty than money in our hands," but in the end, they end up killing Ill in order to get out of the financial crisis. The connection with Switzerland during that time period becomes clear, where just like the people in Gulen, money drove the Swiss moral values. The people of Gulen clearly symbolize the Swiss population, and the actions of the town as a whole can be compared to the actions of the government. By 1942, Switzerland had already deported all of its Jews, closed its borders, and started benefiting from the war by supporting both sides with capital and machinery. Out of 300,000 refugees that managed to enter the country during that period, only 10% of them were Jewish, which showed Switzerland's real motives of trying to remain sympathetic to the Nazis. This idea is also related to the period post-Great Depression, where countries would do literally anything in order to get some money and just get out of the recession. Another concept that is explored in the play is the rationalization of immoral behavior throughout the three acts. In Act 1, the town's response is immediate when Claire first makes the offer. All of the citizens were surprised to hear that, and the mayor immediately responds that they are not savages, and that they reject the offer in the name of humanity. In which Claire maintains her posture since she is confident that she'll be able to achieve her goal. However, by Act 2, people started to realize the benefits of her offer. so they started to buy things on account, which implies that they will pay later, probably once they get the money from Claire. You also notices that they are wearing yellow shoes, in which the yellow color symbolizes cowardice, and that's exactly the way in which Duhamel viewed the Swiss population and government, just a group of cowards that are too scared to step up and do the right thing. As the schoolmaster best puts it, the temptation is too great and our poverty is too wretched, therefore they'll do anything in order to get some money and just get out of the financial crisis. And by Act 3, it becomes clear how all of the moral values are gone. The mayor gave you a shotgun so that he could kill himself, and not to do it themselves. Also, the mayor, policeman, preacher, and schoolmaster had already made up their minds, which serves as an allegorical representation to government, religion, security, and reason, in which all of those were gone and Neil was by himself, just like the Swiss Jews during the time of World War II. It is also important to point out how throughout the play, it is clear how Will becomes more humane and capable of forgiveness. However, the town moves in an opposite direction, and the good and bad characters change position, where in the beginning Will was popular and his ego was high, and now he's humble and more sympathetic. Even Will's family wasn't there to support him anymore, where it symbolizes how Switzerland, a place who was seen by the Allies as a potential hope, wasn't there to support them when they needed them the most. And in the end, the town as a whole kills you, which symbolizes how Switzerland as a whole is responsible for the deaths it caused during World War II. In his play, Duhamel also takes advantage of the context to provide a powerful criticism on capitalism. At first, it's shown how Yu married his wife just because she owned the shop, which shows how there was no love involved, but instead just greed. Then, Duhamel pretty much personifies capitalism in Claire's character in a variety of ways. When Claire loses her baby, she is forced to become a prostitute in order to support herself financially. This could easily be related to the way that Duhamel views capitalism, where people don't care about how they get the money, as long as they get it in the end, where the concept of the ends justify the means plays a crucial role. As Claire best puts it, the world turned me into a whore, I shall now turn it into a brothel. Also, it is shown that Claire was able to survive a plane crash, in which she later gets a prosthetic leg, which shows how capitalism is indestructible, and it also makes people artificial and takes out their entire humane side. And furthermore, Gulen also sells its museum to the US, which can be clearly related to the Marshall Plan, where Duhamel attempts to provide a criticism on capitalism, saying that people and countries pretty much are able to just give up their national sovereignty in exchange for money, that they don't care about their history anymore, they don't care about their moral values, but instead they are just going to do what brings them a financial benefit. And the last concept that can be related to the context in which the play was written is the idea of how easily justice can be corrupted. First, it is evident how Claire buys her justice with ill by using her money and influence to corrupt the system. She was able to buy the Chief of Justice of Gulen to help her and become one of her husbands, in which she named him Bobby. This shows the hypocrisy present in the judicial system, where the one who was responsible to enforce and advocate fairness sold out for her money, just like the Swiss government did with the Nazis. She also bought Roby and Toby out of death row to become her husbands, and castrated Kobe and Lobi and made them blind, since they were the two men that you bribed to say that they also had sex with Claire. Now, having all of their names rhyming shows Claire's power over society as a whole, and also the use of humor serves to ridicule the situation, thus connecting to the ideas of the theater of the absurd, where not only they have their names rhyming, but Colby and Lobby also speak simultaneously, showing how absurd the whole situation is. Now, all of this connects back to his intentional criticism on Swiss neutrality, and the idea that instead of doing the right thing and punishing those who deserve to be punished, the corruption is leading them to punish the innocent ones, where they are all financially benefiting from the situation. Similarly to the visit, Of Mice and Men also takes advantage of the context in which it was written to provide meaning to Steinbeck's work. To give a little bit of context behind the book and its author, John Steinbeck is one of the most respected American authors of his generation. During his youth, he spent most of his summers on ranches, which would later serve as an inspiration for his book. As a consequence, most of his works were also set in California, in which they predominantly explored the themes of fate and of social injustice. Now, about the book itself, it's also set in California during the period of the Great Depression of 1929. The book is a tragic novella that explores the concepts of social realism, in which Steinbeck seeks to expose the harsh realities of migrant workers, as well as to show the harsh treatment that marginalized social groups face, such as women and African Americans. To give a brief summary about the book, it has as its two main protagonists, George and Lenny, two migrant ranch workers. George is characterized as a short, clever worker that partners with Lenny, a tall and strong man. However, he's not very bright. Due to the time period that the story is set, they fail to find a steady job, which forces them to move constantly. However, they find a job in this ranch where Lenny is constantly abused by his boss. With his tradition of accidentally killing things, Lenny ends up killing Curly's wife, also by accident. Since Curly was hunting Lenny down to kill him, George ends up killing Lenny himself at the end. One of the ideas explored in the book that relate to the context in which it was written is the isolation and lonely lives of migrant workers in the early 1930s. The book shows how each worker had to make it on their own, and people only had themselves to seek help during that period. The book captures the coldness of men and how they had no other people in their lives. That is also the reason why George liked to stay with Lenny, where although he caused him a lot of trouble and wasn't intelligent at all, without him George would just be like the other workers, moving from rent to rent without anyone to talk to. As George states, guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family, they belong in no place. This concept of isolation directly relates to the life of migrant workers during the Great Depression. It was clear the failure of capitalism, where no jobs were available for people, businesses were closing, and farm owners had no money to pay people who worked on their ranches. Now, following the concept of social realism, Steinbeck also seeks to expose the way in which marginalized social groups were treated during the period of the Great Depression. At first, it can be seen the treatment that Crooks received in the ranch. He lives separate from the other workers, which symbolized his marginalization from society. Their attitudes towards him could be better seen with Curly's wife when she says, "Well, you keep your place then, the N-word. I could get you strung up on a tree, it ain't even funny." In the 1930s, slavery had already been abolished for more than 60 years. However, discrimination still occurred, and African Americans were still treated as inferior. Another marginalized group portrayed in this book is women, best shown by Curly's wife. The fact that she never had a name in the story presents the idea that women were still seen as men's property, although they already had the right to vote. She would go to the ranch and flirt with the other workers, which conveys the idea that at the time men saw women as objects and that they were only interested in their body, where, as Carson Best puts it, "I bet she would clear out for 20 bucks." Although she had dreams and hopes of becoming successful, in the end she only ended up being Curly's wife, showing how women were treated during the 1930s, where there was no hope for them and they ended up just being seen as men's property. Other elements that are explored in the novella are the individualistic nature of the migrant workers and the loss of hope during the period of the Great Depression. These people had to conform to the harsh reality of the time, as it was seen when Candy had to kill his own dog. However, he wasn't able to do so, and Carlson had to do it for him. This serves to foreshadow the end of the book, when George has to kill Lenny, where he had just uh, to confront the harsh reality of the times and kill his best friend. It also symbolized how easily workers could be disposed, where as soon as one became old, he would just be fired, without any sentiments involved. The rationale behind this death can be better understood with the context of the individualistic reality of the Great Depression. Steinbeck also clearly shows how there wasn't any hope during that period, especially with Lenny. He always had this dream of one day owning his own ranch and being able to tend the rabbits. However, his character contrasted with George, who was an allegorical representation of realism and the harsh reality that they lived on at the time. This idea of owning their own farm related to the American dream that people had during that time. However, all of that was lost due to the Depression. The book's circular plot also relates to this idea, where the novella starts and ends at the same place. This shows how life was hopeless, and it didn't matter how much someone tried, they would always end up in the same place, and this circle would continuously repeat itself. Now to conclude, both works effectively use the context in which they were written to provide a message and meaning behind their text, one to provide a criticism on Switzerland, and other to reflect on the harsh reality of the Great Depression. Duhamel is able to successfully criticize the influence of money in our decisions and the whole capitalist system, which can later lead to the corruption of justice. Steinbeck presents the reader with the lonely lives of migrant workers during the Great Depression, as well as depicting how different social classes and groups were treated around that period. Although the different works have distinct purpose, awareness of the context proved to be crucial in reaching the understanding of the place and provide meaning to the author's works. Thank you.